tomorrow would have been Gertrude Lippincot's 88th birthday. And you notice the Talking Dance series is named after Gertrude. About 5 years ago, I went to John Kalaki, who then had Philip Byler's position as a performing arts curator, and I suggested maybe we could have a way to remember Gertrude, and so this series got named after her. She was an incredibly articulate person, so in addition to making dances and choreographing and performing them, she wrote about dance and she gave many lectures and talks. She was our first nationally known modern dancer in Minnesota. She had a very wonderful career. But I just wanted to mention one performance that she had, which she told me about when I was much younger. I loved to sit at her feet and listen, and she would help coach me when I was having to give a dance lecture or do some writing. So I owe her more than I could ever explain really in a talk for hours. But she told me about this one performance where she was in Cape Cod, and she was intently doing her dramatic moment when a policeman ran across the stage with a cocked gun, and she kept on going, and then a man came running the opposite direction, and she kept on going. And she finished the dance, and the audience politely applauded, and it was only the next day when everybody read the newspaper that they realized that the city jail was in the basement of the theater, and they were watching an escapee. So Gertrude always told me she didn't like surprises. Maybe that was why. But in deference to Gertrude, I don't want to give you any surprises. I'm going to explain a little bit of how the evening is going to unfold. And each of our 7 artists will get a chance to talk to you from this wonderful hot seat and show some slides or something special about a mentor or a choreographer that they worked with who really mattered to them and helped shape what they do today for the dance world here. And they'll be warming up in between. So you'll notice that everybody has a very unique style, a very special way. And in our remarkable dance world here, there isn't any one way to dance. So tonight you'll hear and see that variety. And each will have their turn. And when it's over, if a question occurs to you that you really want to ask, at the end we'll be able to have some time for those. And then, as Philip said, you're all invited afterwards to celebrate with us. So I would like to invite our wonderful people to start just warming up again. And they're not used to this, and this isn't something they thought would be too interesting, but I said it really would be. And since we have some classically trained people, and we're going to start with one of them, and it's not ladies first tonight, so I'm asking Danny to begin.
Hello, I'm Danny Buraczewski. I am the artistic director of Jazz Dance. And I'm very honored to be here tonight to help celebrate this wonderful community. And in 7 minutes, I will try to tell you some stuff about my career. But I know that the people that I'll be telling you about, I think I've been dancing, I'm going on the 34th year of dancing, and 22 of those years I've had a dance company. So, and I think that many of the reasons that I've been able to last this long and to continue to persevere at certain points are really due to the values and the wonderful inspiration that I got from people way, way back at the beginning of my dancing career. I discovered dance, I was at Bucknell University getting a degree in Japanese studies, planning on going into the Foreign Service, and I discovered dance by accident one afternoon. That's funny. All right. One afternoon, I was in the fall of 1968, I think, and it was rainy, and I discovered dance in sort of a room or a hall that was above a hardware store downtown Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And the woman who introduced me to dance, her name was Joan Moyer, and I went basically because I was a sedentary college student and wanted to have some exercise. But she put on this little scratchy old ballet record, and I was transformed. I mean, that afternoon really lives in my mind because I decided right then that this is what I had to do. She was an amazing woman. She had this most fantastic body. My goodness, these beautiful legs and feet. And she was very charismatic and extremely passionate, and she made me feel right from the beginning that I could do whatever I wanted to with dance, even though I knew nothing. And she is still alive, and she's still teaching, and I started to hitchhike after classes to her studio, which was, she came to Lewisburg once a week to teach, and she had her studio in Sudbury, which was like 8 miles away. And after my classes, I would hitchhike to take more and more and more, and then I got to know a lot of the students, and their parents were faculty members at Bucknell. They would drive me home, and so this went on and on and on. But and I watched Joan teach, babies, little kids, teenagers, aspiring dancers, all with the same passion and inspiration. She really performed when she taught. She was so beautiful and so exciting, and I just owe her everything. She was my doorway into this long journey that I've taken. My introduction to dance was through ballet, so that was my very first love. I knew I was going to be a prince someday, for sure. But anyway, that didn't work out. But anyway, then when I got out of college and just tried to make a real career for myself in dance, since we're talking about ballet, I was a boy. I was a boy once, that's true. I was a boy, and I got a scholarship at the Pennsylvania Ballet, and I was really fortunate at different points in my career to just so happen to come upon remarkable teachers. And someone at the Pennsylvania Ballet, there was a teacher named Edward Caton, and both Joan and Edward Caton and the other people I talked about never talked about dance without talking about music. This is from, I have many notebooks that I've kept along the years. I must have about 25 of them. And this is Edward Caton. And you can see that he's sitting in a chair. He was the first American student allowed to go to school at the Kirov. And he was remarkable. He was Anna Pavlova's dancing partners. So he was, quite old by the time that I encountered him at the Pennsylvania Ballet, and he had, I think, 2 strokes and didn't speak very well and talked most of the time from a chair. And I've never seen such beauty and movement of a man just sitting in a chair and teaching from this chair. He taught the most amazing character class and taught these beautiful ballet classes, and he really taught that you could develop the muscles musically. If you took the leg out on the upbeat and you brought it in on the downbeat, that the muscles responded differently. And this is the kind of training. He never talked about movement without talking about music. And I was chunky, bumpy, and lumpy. And the gift that he gave to me, and I hope that I have given to others, is that I never felt chunky and bumpy and lumpy in his class. He saw other things. He saw how much I loved dancing and how much I loved music, and this was like serious ballet world. I was in the class, he often invited me to come take the real advanced classes because he knew I needed to make up for lost time. And he would eat garlic because he was trying to keep his blood going because not to have another stroke, and he would literally eat raw garlic many times during the class. It was a very intense experience. But he would often make me come to the front because of the way I responded musically to the exercises, and it was embarrassing, but I did it because I loved him, and he gave me so much, and he was an extraordinary, extraordinary man. And then this gentleman, whoa! This is Igor Shvetsov, and I encountered him when I was studying in New York. He taught at the Yuskevich School in New York, and he was a very, very eccentric man, and again taught dance. Never separated music and dancing, and he was the ballet master for the Metropolitan Opera Ballet, and taught some open classes at the Yuskevich School. And this was my first, these classes, wow, already? Wow, okay. Anyway, he smoked the entire time during class. And he had this funky and amazing relationship with the pianist. Like, he would just get up and just sort of doing this and doing that, and the pianist knew exactly what he wanted, and we sort of did. And the more you took his classes, the more you learned about music, because he really didn't say very much about it. It was just by watching him and how the accompanist responded to him. Anyway, there you go. This is the other woman in my dance life, besides my Joan Moore. This is Betsy Haug. And when I was looking for jazz, I found out about jazz music in college and dancing. And I was in New York looking for a real great jazz class, and I was only finding sort of things geared towards work in the commercial theater, and I was looking for something jazz music, and I had a really hard time finding it, and then someone told me about Betsy. And she wears double lashes to teach. Yeah, that tells us something fantastic. And I was walking up steps and I heard this fantastic music, and I knew this was going to be the place for me. And it was, because she really taught me everything. Everything that I do with jazz, the core of it still goes back to what I learned from Betsy about rhythm. Her classes were so complicated because she used music that just didn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, were all sorts of meters. She was a totally devotee of tap dancing, so it was so complicated. And I had already been dancing, and I had to go to the back of the class and work my way forward after a long time. And she is still teaching. She lives in Seattle, and she was sort of like distant. And I had a really wonderful experience. I started taking every class. I became her assistant. I would teach when she would go away. And then I got into a musical on Broadway, which was in this style with Liza Minnelli. But she was sort of distant. And that was fine, because that's what she wanted. And is that not? Oh, that's not Liza Minnelli. Anyway, that's me and Kathy on the right, and Anne Marie. They were members of the Theater Dance Collection. Oh, that's Mame, that's Angela Lansbury. That's me on the right. That number's called That's How Young I Feel. All right. And then, there we go. I'm in the back there. So anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, yes, yeah, Betsy was sort of, she was very professional, and she was an incredible teacher. And the thing about her, when I saw her move, I just said, I have to move like that. I want to know how to move like that. Even though she was wearing heels, I said, I really need to, I want to move like that. And 2 years ago, they convinced her to come back to the East Coast and teach at the Boston Summer Dance Festival, and I hadn't seen her in 10 years. About 10 years, and I was myself teaching a thing at the Boston Ballet, and in between my classes there, I ran over and I was going to take 2 of her classes. And the first one, I was really nervous, and because, it was just a long time. And we did the warm-up, and then we went across the floor, and then we did the combination, and she stopped the class and came over and gave me this huge hug, which was so amazing to me, because that was not really what she was about when I first met her. But anyway, this is with Liza Minnelli, and it was a great experience. And then this was another glamour. All right. This is a number called City Lights, and this was from the opening of the Tony Awards of that year, 1978, maybe? Something like that. And what else have we got here? Oh, this black costume, this is the kind of show it was. This costume, we wore these for the Tonys, but in the show itself, we only wore for the curtain call. It was a curtain call costume. Hello. I'm teaching at the Richmond Ballet. That's glamour. I guess. And that's at the Bates Dance Festival doing, I can't remember what actually. It was some kind of Bible soul or something. I don't know. It was a rehearsal. I think that's the end. But, okay, so those 4 people, and then this group of dancers called the Theater Dance Collection. It was the first dance company I worked with. They were a collective of people, and I learned from them they taught me how to work in a company with other people, because it's different in a company than being on Broadway. And they were wonderful people and allowed you to experiment and grow and take chances. And so I would just like to thank those 4 teachers and that group of choreographers who sort of set the work ethics that I've sort of maintained and done. And then the last group that I think that has sustained me are all the dancers that I've worked with. I think dancers are wonderful people. And you know, 22 years I was counting. I think in my companies, there's about 40 dancers, and they are in my heart forever and have sustained me. So that's it for me.
Well, I went through my basement. I got a few pictures for you. Not all of them. It's still a mess, but anyway. The first thing I wanted to show you is that I started out really wanting to be a classical ballet dancer. I really wanted to do Les Sylphides, and that's what I left Milwaukee, Wisconsin to do. I went to New York. I'm the fourth one from the left. The girl in front of me is Linda Shapiro. We were in a little company in Milwaukee together. Took different paths, but anyway. But you know, on the way, it's been so interesting because I ended up doing a lot of contemporary dance and modern dance and jazz and everything, but what Philip was saying about it always being a learning experience is so true, because you're always trying to understand a different kind of energy and musicality and find these other forms of shapes of the body, getting your body used to that kind of physicality. And it's fascinating to keep doing that. So I had a big opportunity to do that. My first job was with Paul Taylor. It was the very beginning of his choreographic career. We went to Theatre of Nations in Paris and performed there. That's Dan Wagner on the ground, and Paul in the back, and I'm over there on the left-hand side. And I had a great time dancing with him and learning. I learned how to do contractions in the lobby of a theater in Montmartre. From Betty DeYoung. It was great. And there was this little lady coming downstairs to open the gate in a pink peignoir and, you know, with curlers in her hair and everything. It was just, oh, so interesting to be in Paris for the first time and to be traveling. Paul was kind of raising money en route. We were doing fundraising events, and then we extended the tour a little, went to Italy and had a great time. Oh, another great person I had to work with was Jack Cole, who's like the original jazz man, the one that put classical jazz together and trained Gwen Verdon and Matt Maddox and people like that, and choreographed for a lot of the Broadway shows. Here he's working with Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot, I think that's what it is. But he was working with us at the Harkness Ballet, and I think we worked for about a year, 2 hours a day, and produced a piece, partial piece. We never finished it, but probably the hardest thing I ever did in my life. It took so much energy, and he was so demanding and articulate, and you know, expected so much from us. And he had all these great comments, you know, that came from Hollywood. Things like, "You're slower than Alice Faye underwater." Oh, what? Who's Alice Faye? What do you think you're doing? Selling Girl Scout cookies? Where's an education? Oh, and then I had the opportunity to do some comedy. I worked with Todd Bolander, whose background was New York City Ballet, but, well, we did Still Point, and we also did this parody of the Grand Hotel, where I was Theda Bara, and the Sala Yellow I'm working with. And so we learned about timing and the art of comedy and so forth. That's Ben Harkavy created this ballet called Madrigalesco, and he was a great mentor. He was the assistant director of Harkness Ballet for a long time. Now he's in charge of the Juilliard School. And for the first time, I really felt like there was a director who was there in the way a director should be, very, very supportive, giving lots of corrections in class and watching every performance and giving feedback on what you're doing, so you understood what you were conveying to the audience. And he helped me so much, dramatically, technically. You know, he's a very articulate person, wonderful inspiration. Then a great one was Anthony Tutor. This is from Lilac Garden. I met him right away when I went to Juilliard, and he was, you know, some of the concepts that, and then I left after 1 year and studied with him at the Met, and then worked with him at ABT. But his style of moving, he wanted to create a dancer that was free of a technical style, so that we would be free to interpret any kind of ballet, any kind of character. You know, we could just, with him, you needed to take one step and indicate the character. It had to be there totally. So, for instance, when he taught me Judgment of Paris, he sat on the chair and he talked what the character was thinking through the whole dance. And I was going like, where's the steps? You know, he didn't even show us the steps. He was like, this is what it's about first. Then the steps came. And then at other ballets, he was more intent on just teaching the movement, so that there wouldn't be a lot of extra drama connected to it. Well, I'll talk about him more later, but he was a very big influence. There was a period where I went to Holland and I danced with Netherlands Dance Theater. This piece is by Jennifer Molar, where we had to do dramatic presentation and also, you know, full-out physicality. She was such a physical person. And we had a rock band up on a balcony in the back, and this dance was done with long sleeves, and they were tied around our bodies, so we could never use our arms, and it was sort of a male-female wrestling event. And this is by Norman Walker. I worked with him real early on, before I joined any ballet company. He was sort of part of the school where Gertrude Schur was teaching, and May O'Donnell. They were from the original Graham Company. So there I did some modern work, and I discovered that you don't inhale on a contraction, you exhale, and things like, you know, basics. Always just floundering around trying to figure out how to do all this movement en route. And this is After Eden from Harkness Ballet. It was by John Butler. Also contemporary work. And we were, you know, I remember a time where we were trying to figure out how you move from a turned-in position to a turned-out position, and how do you make that work. It was like an issue at one time, because modern dancers and ballet dancers didn't mix, and they didn't take ballet class and so forth. You know, so, and then how to get up and down from the ground, and very, very difficult partnering in that piece. There's Tutor again. You can see his character is there. He's doing one of the parts. It's totally through his body. And a student of Tutor's was Maggie Black, and I think she influenced me and helped me move on to my next career of teaching. She took his principles and made them legible for the rest of us. And they talked about a technique where you could actually learn how to do classical ballet from the inside and use the beauty of the technique and the ability to develop your physicality through it without trying to do the shapes. So many people at that time were just teaching the shape, fifth position, tight fifth position, legs up here, you know. And she was explaining how to do it from the inside. And I think she made a tremendous difference in the whole country about the way we study ballet now. And the atmosphere was very supportive, and she talked a lot about how the back moved through space, and the placement being a very important thing. And we all, you know, spent hours and hours talking to her, so she knew us as people, and coached. We did a lot of coaching, and I mean, the whole city was there. She taught two classes a day and then coached afterwards. And all the modern dancers were in class, and the ballet dancers from all companies. So I think now everyone's kind of teaching that way. It's very, it's including a lot of knowledge about the body, which, I don't know, it seems like before we were kind of being intimidated into doing these peculiar positions, and not everybody can do them, you know, so. And that was inspiring for me to be able to work with Maggie and to do coaching with her. So I decided to move on and teach. And I look happy doing it, don't I? So, thank you.
I'm Ranee Ramaswamy, Artistic Director of Ragamala Music and Dance Theater, and I'm a better dancer than a speaker, but I'll try my best. Dance is such an integral part of my life now that it's hard for me to believe that if I had not come to the United States, I would have never continued doing it. I grew up in the southeastern part of India, in a very conservative family where young girls mostly learned music because that was something that stayed with them forever. Dance was something that you stopped when you got married or had kids. So I started to learn music first when I was 5. And then, but I loved dance so much that it took me about 2 years to convince my parents that I was serious. So they finally found me a dance teacher. And Bharatanatyam, the style of dance that I do, originated from the region where I grew up. And there were some fabulous master teachers in that area, but my parents found the worst teacher in the world for me. The only reason was that she was the only one that would come to my house and teach. So beggars can't be choosers. So I studied with this woman from the age of 8 to 17 in my parents' living room, 3 days a week. At 15, my parents decided I'm not going to perform anymore because young women are not supposed to be seen on stage. So I still continued learning until I was 17. I got engaged. I got married at 20. I had Aparna at 23, and I came to the United States with my family in 1978. I was 26 years old. Then I made some friends with the Indian community, and they knew that I had studied dance for a long time, so they asked me if I would perform at an Indo-American Student Association celebration at Kaufman Union. And I couldn't believe it because I was an old woman, you know, I was 26, I was a mom, and here I had a chance to dance, but I was so excited that I had no costume, I had no music, but sorry. Well, that was me when I was like 9 years old. So I wore a sari, got music from somebody, and created 2 pieces. I danced, and I loved doing what I did, and the audience seemed to like it. So then the community people asked me if I would teach their kids because there wasn't any Bharatanatyam dancer there at that time. But for those who don't know much about Bharatanatyam, now there are 2 aspects to it. We have rhythmic dances and we have storytelling dances. Now it's a classical dance form, so we had a vocabulary of rhythms and a vocabulary of hand gestures. Now I had forgotten all the vocabulary because I hadn't danced from 17 to 26. So it was like a poet who didn't know alphabets, grammar, or composition. So I went back to India, found a teacher, relearned all the vocabulary, learned about 4 or 5 dances, came back and started to teach here. My first class was in the Guild of Performing Arts. And some of Nancy Hauser's dancers, students, company members, took classes with me at that time, long, long ago. Then I kept going back to India with my daughter to study more. And then in 1983, I found my present teacher, Alarmel Valli, who's the best in the style of dance. Now, she came to the University of Minnesota to do a workshop and a couple of performances. And the most ironic thing is, she was famous when I was growing up. She was 4 years younger than me, and she lived a mile away from my house. But I met her in Minneapolis. And many, many, many years later, and Aparna and I took classes with her. Now, I was enamored by her style, the precision, the clarity, the beauty, the complexity of her choreography. And she was impressed by Aparna and said, if you bring her to India, I'll teach her. So I was 31, Aparna was 8. In 1983, we went back to India, and I relearned everything all over again with Aparna from Alarmel Valli. And you know, all these years, I've been switching roles from being a teacher to a student. And it's such a different experience being a student in India. You cannot demand anything from your teacher. The fee that you pay is a token for the gift you receive. You touch your teacher's feet before and after class, every single class. And because you're letting go of your ego, and with great humility, you're accepting what she gives you. So it makes what you get so special. But as a teacher here, you really don't get that. And so till 1991, I was a very community-oriented dancer. And then in 91, the Minnesota Dance Alliance presented my work with Robert Bly at Studio 6A. And that opened many doors for me. In 92, I formed Ragamala Music and Dance Theater. And now I have 7 dancers in the company who are from all different nationalities, and they are like sponges. You know, they learn what I teach them, and they're just amazing dancers to work with. The only dance form that I've studied is Bharatanatyam, but I believe very truly that it's such an incredible art form that I've been working on creating innovative work that challenges me as a choreographer and also makes it more interesting and accessible to the audience here. So some of the work that I have done includes choreographing to Japanese taiko drumming, pipa music, blues, jazz, working with poets, photographers. This is my company. And I recently created a piece for Xenon Dance Company. I have 2 daughters in the company, that Aparna Ramaswamy, who has established herself as a dancer and a choreographer, and Ashwini Ramaswamy, and she's been dancing with me for 20 years. Ashwini Ramaswamy has been dancing for 10 years, and she's just started choreographing. So I'm sure that Bharatanatyam will survive, thrive, and take many different shapes and forms with their choreography. What I've learned, the art form, I've learned from India, but it's Minnesota that has nurtured and encouraged me in creating all this new work. So I am absolutely full of appreciation and gratitude for this community. I'm 49 and I'm still dancing. And I'm so proud to be part of this fabulous group of choreographers. Thank you for having me here.
For me. I think I can make it up here. I'm going to move the mic a little bit. I'm Heidi Hauser Jasmin, the artistic director of the Nancy Hauser Dance Company and School, about 2 blocks away up on the corner of Franklin and Hennepin above Birch Pharmacy. And I'm excited to be here tonight. It brings back memories of having actually performed on this stage 30 years ago, which is amazing to be back here. I want to tell you one thing, that the stage is raked. I found that out when I had a ball as a prop and we were working. And I had to, right on the spot in the performance, change my idea because it started to roll down the stage. And I learned how to be spontaneous through my training, and I'd like to talk a little bit about, although I was has stimulated my development, and that comes because I grew up in a very stimulating environment coming from an artistic family. My father was a sculptor, my mother a choreographer, and all of those things influenced how I saw the world. And I also grew up on a farm, so nature surrounded me, and the world became exciting for me because we always had parties on the farm. And it was always the adults that were exciting to be with. I would go to high school in West St. Paul, and it was terrible. I was just so lonely and not stimulated. But when I would go to the farm, and there would be these wonderful parties with all the stimulating conversation, all this world of ideas, that's what got me going. And I'm going to show you the first picture here, if I get the right button. Forward. There we go. This is the early days of American modern dance. We'll go back to the very, very beginnings. And the great pioneers in the United States, Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey, Charles Weidman, and Hanya Holm, who had just come to this country from Germany before the war in the early 30s. The American Dance Festival at Bennington. This is a photograph from that festival, and you can see the wonderful exuberance and the joy of the movement. My mother accompanied Hanya to the Bennington Festival, and she was her assistant for the first 3 years of that festival. But not only did she assist Hanya in the teaching, she was also a musician, and she was asked to accompany some of the pieces that were choreographed there by Doris Humphrey. She played music that was composed by Henry Cowell. So music was a very important part of her beginnings in modern dance. Her very first teacher, actually, in Connecticut, was a woman named Louise Revere Morris, and she taught rhythmic dance, which I think was probably a little bit like called natural dance, and much like Isadora Duncan. So that was her first impression, and then when she started working with Hanya Holm and Doris Humphrey, that's when it really solidified. And being up at Bennington those 3 years was so exciting because there was a real revolution in dance. It was a real rebellion against other forms, and being able to create music as part of what she was doing was always very important to her, that element of creating music, and original music. And here's another picture of Hanya. No, I thought it was going to be Hanya. Well, it's my mother, Nancy. And we jumped to the 40s. This was here. She moved here to Minnesota in the 40s after having been a New Yorker all her life, moved to the Midwest. Very little modern dance here except for Gertrude Lippincott. And she was a very good friend of Gertrude's. And she started the dance programs at Macalester and also at Carleton College, but soon after that, she really wanted to start her own studio and get away from the academic world. And such an important part of her teaching was teaching improvisation, composition, music, pedagogy, all of those things. And that's what you learned as a dancer in developing not only your body as an instrument of expression, but learning how to work with the craft and become an artist yourself. Here she's outside being joyous. And this is an interesting photo historically. This was her first group in the 50s. She actually started out in St. Paul. The dance group was called the Contemporary Dancers. Nancy is on the left. Lois Holton is back on the next person. Irina Lassoff, Lillian Anderson, Ann Mossman, and Sage Coles. They were all in Nancy's first group. So that was an exciting period too. I was just a little girl around on the edges at that point in time. This is when we were at the Guild of Performing Arts. And that was the place that we worked throughout the 70s, a very exciting time to be around. All the experimenting we were doing, and we were doing concerts of our own choreography. We were always encouraged to do our own choreography, and she even was encouraging us to have pieces in her concerts. I have to tell you about one evening that we did here at the Walker Arts Center. And this was Nigel Redden's first year. We rented the theater, and we wanted to do a concert, and we called it Off the Walker Wall, or Everything We've Always Wanted to Do but Have Never Dared. And we spread the word. This was a company concert. We didn't let Nancy see any of the pieces. We just wanted to surprise her. We spread the word around that we were going to throw spaghetti on the Walker Wall. And that word got out. We just did that as a joke. But, of course, we didn't throw spaghetti on the wall, but we did some pretty far-out things. Nancy was a great teacher, as I said. She opened doors for us to discover our own identity. Both she and Hanya taught principles of motion. We learned about the concept of centrifugal force, momentum, gravity. We worked a lot with that idea of weight, and worked with curves and spirals and going off balance and working with suspensions, and also through learning those principles, developing your own identity rather than learning a style. And part of those principles that I feel is unique to this particular tradition is the idea that space is a real thing that you work with. It's something that you're not only working with your body as an instrument, but the space is equally important. So when you're working in dance, you're always thinking of the space around your body, you're working with positive and negative space, and you're working with three-dimensional space. So it's not a flat front wall as you're learning to create dances. There's the picture of Hanya. Hanya was a great little lady. I studied with her for 4 summers out in Colorado. She was short like me. She had short Achilles tendons like I did, and I connected with that. And she also had a wonderful sense of humor. And you weren't too distant from her because we even played charades, the students and the teachers, and we did things that were, we were as a group together. The thing that was inspiring about Hanya was being able to take her theory and composition classes. You would work for an hour and a half on one principle like vibration, just that one element. Or one principle like directions, forward and backwards, forward and backwards. So that sense of discipline we were taught through her work, but also being able to listen to her stories and hear her talk about astronomy. She loved the sciences. She always had other interests, as my mother did actually my mother was very involved in radical politics. So as a contrast to Ronnie's conservative family, I came from a very liberal family and I never rebelled against that. I'm still liberal. Here we are, mother and daughter. This was taken in the 80s. I love this photo. And here is a company in the early 80s. I'm not going to give names, but some of you may recognize people there. I have so many photos, I can't tell you. I've got albums and albums, and I've preserved those photos, and I'm working on an archival project at this point in time. And here is a photo of Murray Lewis and myself and Nancy, and the reason I'm showing you this photo is because Michael Yonkers is in the background. And Michael, I'm quite sure, has done more choreographer evenings than anybody in this town. He is a true Minnesotan, and Michael is here tonight up in the balcony somewhere. Many of his 100 or more tiny dances have been presented on this stage. This is an improvisation that I did with Steve Potts, who's on the right, myself, and Gary Lund at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Steve Potts is also here. And this was just an improvisation where I hung these nets. My work is quite visual. I love working with props. In this last photo, another prop. A while back, but it's props. And again, the work that I do tends to be abstract, very spatial, and extremely visual. And I hope you all have questions afterwards, and thank you so much for coming.
Just as our dance lives are shaped by our teachers and fellow dancers, our work is shaped by the spaces that we work in. You can turn the volume down on that so we just get the image. In this dance, you see Lance Westergaard and myself. Lance and I started with a page full of drawings, 2 figures together in different positions made by Remy Charlotte, one of Remy's airmail dances. We were told to use these positions and create transitions in between them. The idea of creating dances by giving the dancers drawings was invented by Remy. He had been in South America. He flew to Australia to create a piece for a dance company in Sydney. And he didn't have a yellow fever certificate, so they put him in quarantine. And then they wouldn't let him out of quarantine. And he had to be working with the company, so he started every day making drawings and sending them to the company, and they would do these drawings and then make transitions from one position in the drawing to the next to the next. And so that was the beginning of what Remy calls his airmail dances. Clearly, dances that were affected by the constrictions of the space that he was working in, quarantine. This particular airmail dance was created in a beautiful, cool, spacious dance studio, the Ethnic Folk Art Studio on Varick Street in Manhattan. Up on the 2nd floor, it was a cool oasis from the hustle and bustle of the city down below. This was the summer of 1984. And the main thing that I remember about that rehearsal process was that it was the most delightful engagement with other dancers, the most heavenly rehearsal process of my life. The thing that stood out as the big moment of tension was the day that Remy said to David Thompson, "David, use the 30 minutes I give you for warming up to warm up. Don't eat lunch during it." So, did I lose my first page here? Right, nope, there we go. Okay. My first dance classes were at the University of Minnesota. But rather than tell you about all my teachers, I'm just going to talk about all of the spaces. So the University of Minnesota, that's your cue. Take it, Danny. The name alone of the first place I took classes was pretty off-putting. If that wasn't bad enough, in Norris Gym, the men's locker room was all the way down the longest hall and into the basement. And then the classes were either in this white room that had windows up above and an okay floor and a whole wall of mirrors, but just felt somehow very confining, or they were upstairs in the gymnasia, which were these huge cavernous rooms with floors that were harder than stone. But all of my memories of dancing at the university were not hostile environments, because occasionally I got to take class on stage. And at Northrop Auditorium, there is more room to move than a football field. Finally, I didn't have to hold back on the combination. I could finish the combination and I was only halfway through the space. And then on the days when they opened the curtains, there was more space to project out into than you could handle. If you weren't careful, you'd lose your center trying to project out up into the second balcony in Northrop Auditorium. So I left the university. The next space that I danced in was this hotbed of creative activity, the Guild of Performing Arts. Oh, a dance studio on the second floor, a theater that doubled as a dance studio on the first floor, music rooms in the basement. This was the West Bank. This was Bohemia. This was a funky warehouse space in the center of counterculture in Minneapolis in the 1970s. And right in the middle of it, there was a post. On the first floor and on the second floor. And many an irresistible dancer would encounter this unmovable object. In the spirit of the Guild of Performing Arts, I went off and got my own studio together with Joanne Tillemans. It was at 2511 Bloomington Avenue South. And went by there 2 days ago. It's now a Somali coffee shop. And there was a man about my age sitting in front of the coffee shop, and I asked him, "Where were you in 1977 when this was my dance studio?" And he said, "I was working in Saudi Arabia. The only thing you can count on is change." We lost that studio because our crazy landlord was afraid that the shaking we were doing of the building was going to cause one of the gas pipes to break and the whole building would explode. So he illegally evicted us. And then Contact Works got its own studio, 324 Fifth Avenue South. We sometimes called it Cityscape. It was basically the warehouse next to the Little Wagon Bar. That was a great space. Up there was Contact Works, Kyle Staver, a sculptor, Palace Theater, and Mindy Melamed, the first dancer I knew in town who illegally lived in a loft space. We sort of came of our own in that space. We taught classes there, we rehearsed there, we put on performances there, we had parties there. And eventually, Bob Andrews, our landlord, evicted us all from the building. From there, Contact Works moved across town to the Harmony building, 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street North. We shared again the southeast corner of the second floor. The rest of the space was taken up by a theater company.
I need help.
Thank you. But the theater company, what they didn't know was that this building had some bad karma. They ran out of money. They didn't have money to pay the rent. The landlord changed the locks and didn't give Olympia keys. They gave us keys because we had still paid our rent. So one day I hear this, bam, 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 let me in, let me in. I am Olympia. We were told not to let her in, so we didn't. But like I said, it was bad karma because then that went on to be the whole building got turned into loft spaces, and that was where Andrew Cunanan started his murder spree. And so I left that building, and the next space that I had was downtown Minneapolis, in the heart of the city, 7th and Hennepin. I was no longer in the center of creative activity. I was in the center of the whole damn city. 3,200 square feet of space for $300 a month, including heat. But the great thing about it was that we put a lot of sweat equity into that space. It didn't have a dance floor. It had these splintery fir boards that you'd get slivers in. So the city at the time was tearing down a ballroom at Nicollet and Lake. We got permission to go into the building. I gathered a whole bunch of friends and a whole bunch of crowbars, and we pried up every floorboard from that ballroom floor, dropped them out the window into the sand pit. There used to be a building next door. They'd torn the building down, filled it up with sand. So we dropped them like spears into the sand, bundled them up, hauled them downtown, built a hoist to haul them all the way up the 3 floors of fire escape in the back of the building, brought them in, cleaned them up, took the nails out, and pounded them all into place. It was a fabulous building and my favorite memory of that building was a concert we did called Dancing Upstairs. It was me and Wendy Morris and Wendy Oliver and Terry Cruzan. And at one point during that concert, there were 4 simultaneous solos that happened. We repeated it 4 times. The audience had to switch places each time to see each solo. Wendy Morris did a solo in the elevated bathtub. Wendy Oliver did a solo dancing, flying off the radiator and landing on a bed. Terry used the dining room platform, which I had to build because the floorboards underneath it were too weak to walk on, so I just built a platform sort of suspended over it. And then I did a very minimalist solo just for the muscles of my back and the sort of eagle's nest that was my sleeping area. Well, eventually we had to give up that space, and then of course the city came and tore the whole block down. And the next space that I got was at St. Stephen's School. They had a beautiful old gym. They didn't have any money to pay me for teaching. I didn't have any money to pay for a rehearsal space, so we bartered, and I taught in exchange for having use of the gym after school. Because it was a sort of inner city, liberation theology Catholic school, I could do whatever I wanted to in the space, so we even did performances there where Poonie Dodson and I danced naked in this Catholic grade school gymnasium. A couple years after being at St. Stephen's, that was actually the place that gave birth to Patrick's Cabaret. I got another space just across the freeway from there, about 2,400 square feet of space. Back to the beginning days, 2 posts right in the middle of the space. And the floor so beat up you couldn't sand it again. So we just painted the floor white with this white polyurethane paint, painted the walls white, and I came to understand that I had this tradition of working in a white box, which was the antithesis of a black box in the theater world. The black box is about creating a space, a separate world that's completely isolated from the rest of the world. A white box is a space that floats, anchored in the neighborhood that it lives in. I'll never forget the night that Helyu came up to me before a cabaret was going to start. She was this crazy immigrant who lived across the street, and she said, "So, what is happening tonight in the house of windows?" It was a great space, and some of my favorite memories were working together with John Kalaki. He and I together independently produced a live version of Isaac Julian's film, Looking for Langston, that used all 4 floors of the building. 3rd floor was the changing room. 2nd floor, there were naked black angels dancing in John Kalaki's loft bed. 1st floor, in the basement, there were other scenes that happened from the film. And at one point, they plugged a fog maker into the wrong circuit, and it blew the fuses for the basement and the 1st floor. And a very panicky patron in the basement, because it went totally black in the basement, started hyperventilating and almost lost it before we could get new fuses back in and get the situation resolved. I ended up giving up that space, as wonderful as it was, for the space that I now work in, which is Patrick's Cabaret on Minnehaha Avenue. And this space used to be the radical theater space of the 1960s. And when we got the building, the first thing that I did was take all the money we had and more and put in a world-class dance floor in the space, a big open space with no posts. The same time the Barker Center for Dance was opening up at the University of Minnesota, and I remember going over to the Barker Center to check it out and looking up in the building as I got to it and realizing that the Barker Center was all about up and up and up. And I thought how different that was from being at this new theater where we had just put this floor in, and then the bare floorboards before we put the polyurethane on seduced me into going down into the floor and taking off my clothes and just rolling naked across the wooden floor. It confirmed what I knew, that the space that you dance in makes a huge difference in terms of the kinds of dance that you create. And so here I am, 29 years after the first Choreographers Evening that I performed in. I didn't make it the first year. Got here the second year. On this very important stage in Minneapolis, this what I call spaghetti farm of a stage, but nonetheless, a very important stage in this city. Thank you very much.
Judith, you said 57 minutes? These are my notes, but these are the ones I'm really going to speak from. Can you hear me with this? There's so much to say. 30 years. I guess it's been 30 years. I was 23 when I started dancing. It was too late to become a ballerina. So I just followed my nose. Molly Lynn at Madison, Wisconsin, took me to Hanya for a summer, and then I ended up in Minneapolis. I really want to talk about 4 or 5 different influences that I had that I feel like are absolutely coming through me now in my daily life, in my teaching. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Nancy Hauser, a little bit about the Grand Union. I don't know if anyone was here when they came that first time. Really? Blew me away. And then I want to talk about Harry Martin Trio, which was a group that I was in. Oh, here they are already, great. And then I want to talk about Trisha Brown, who I danced with for 5 years, and also did my Alexander technique training. But I wanted to start with Nancy. Now, Heidi already talked about Nancy and all of the amazing, she created such an umbrella for all different threads of creativity, but she had very strong ideas herself. And more than actually talking about the people themselves, what I want to do is say what I took from each of these people. And from Nancy, it was very much that the belief that dance was so much more than technical prowess. It was gathering the forces of the universe at your beck and call and then expressing the hell out of yourself. But really what she worked with were the physical laws of nature, and that's what you were exploring as a dancer. So there was space, time, and energy. And I always felt like time and energy were a little foggy to me, but the space thing I loved. And with Nancy, you never just walked through space. You walked through space, and you continued on and on and on, hopefully out beyond the point of ecstasy. That was what Nancy did. The funny thing is, though, that years later when I got into the postmodern thing, that's how she talked about it, the postmodern thing, and was dancing with Trisha, she said to me, Elizabeth, you used to be so ecstatic. So Minneapolis was pretty sequestered at that point, from my experience. And then all of a sudden, something like this breeze came from New York City. And Judith Ingber and Sue Weil, I don't know what the influence was you had there, but Sue Weil was at the Walker then. And she brought, oh, go back to the Grand Union. She brought this group from New York called the Grand Union. Is that Lori? Yeah, the Grand Union. And these guys just blew me away. I mean, I went, did a 180 with them. They performed on this stage, for those of you that were at that very first concert. And I had been coming from a traditional modern dance background, and the Grand Union came up here, and it was, what, 6, 7 people? That's Barbara Dilley in the striped pants, and Trisha Brown, David Gordon, Steve Paxton, and I think Nancy Green and Douglas Dunn. And so it was all these grown-ups out on the stage, just doing the most amazing gropings for some spontaneous epiphanous moment of brilliance or even boredom. It didn't even matter to me because I loved the process. I realized that I love watching people make choices. And they also introduced me to the risk of not knowing what comes next. So you really don't know, and realizing that that risk was worth it. And so I decided that since the rules were changing, that when I went back to Nancy's and we had an improv, I was still dancing with Nancy. And she used to give directions to the improv, but you always knew that no matter how silly or quirky the improvisation directions would be, that there was a secret hope that we would all kind of somehow come to the center of the room with this pulse of unison, and which would turn into this. Everybody in unison. So one day she was there, and we were 15 or 20 people in the room, and the direction was, this was after the Grand Union had been here, her direction was, see a spot and go to it. See another spot and go to it. And when she gave that first direction, I happened to be at the window looking outside onto the West Bank and Cedar Avenue and Edna's Cafe. And I thought, oh my God, do I have the courage? Yes. And I scuttled down the steps, walked out the door, and thought, wow. And I walked down the street and went into Edna's and had a cup of coffee while the class was going on. And I thought, wow, this is different. If this is art, I can do it, right? And so, go to the next one. So we did do it. Judith Regier and Gail Turner and myself formed a group we called the Harry Martin Trio. And we just did everything we wanted to do. We totally explored. We mostly performed improvisation. Inside living rooms, bathrooms. We wanted to hire ourselves out for parties if you wanted, people to come and improvise. We never got hired. Judith, that's the only picture. I don't have any pictures, because who took pictures back then, right? And so what I just wanted to quickly say about the Harry Martin Trio was that we had 3 rules of improvisation that we kind of discovered post doing it, but we thought, we really do have some rules here. And the first one was no judging allowed, that if we're improvising, that who knew if a moment of total stupidity might not turn into brilliance? I mean, that's the essence of improvisation. You have to trust it, right? The second rule was that you're not the only one on stage. So don't try so hard. And the third one is that if you don't know what to do, have you ever been improv and performing and you don't know what to do? You're just, nothing's working. Find a hole and go through it. Okay, if you can find one, go through it. So Harry Martin continued, but we started to break up, and then there was a phone call. The phone rang. It was Trisha asking if I would move out to New York City. And I packed. I think I had 3 weeks to pack, leave my whole life here. I had a duffel bag and a backpack, that kind of lifestyle. I got on the train to New York City, got off the train, right away took all my stuff down on this taxi cab. I'm sure I didn't I don't remember if I subwayed. Down in the taxi cab, walked up 5 flights of stairs, and I had come from this incredible expansion, of the Midwest and the expansiveness of Nancy Hauser and even our quirky, expansive Harry Martin Trio. And I walked into Trisha's studio for the first day of rehearsal, and I literally walked right in to the center of a cube. It was an imaginary cube. It was the first piece we learned, which was locus. Points on the cube, corresponding to letters of the alphabet, corresponding to the first line of her bio. Somehow she had created this structure. I can't believe I'm remembering this. That was the very first part. I can't believe I recalled that. It's been, 20 years or something. But that was what I walked into. And I realized that we were often criticized. People wondered why I would want to dance with this person who had these structures that were so dry and so cerebral and analytical and so unpassionate. And I think they didn't realize that we were with Tricia in very seminal years. I was with her for 5 years, the first actual dance company that she had after she did all her equipment pieces and everything. She was really trying to divest herself of everything she knew about modern dance, all her classes, all the technique, and really come up with a vocabulary that was totally new. Totally new. So how do you do that? She created these incredible structures, and at the same time, in order to fulfill the structure or the task, well, at the time I was doing Alexander technique, which was informing me with this incredible possibility of the space between stimulus and response, that if you could not respond at the moment the stimulus happened, that there would be this really open space, this empty field, which created this crispness and being in the moment and ready for anything, responsiveness. And the whole company was actually warming up by doing the balls, Elaine Summers' kinetic awareness work, which was helping us to find every possible little teeny square inch of movement in every bit of our body. So we were taking this technique, if you want to call it that, and like putting it through this really, really strict filter. And what came out were, like, to me, jewels of the most unique, innovative, body-friendly. Talk about Bonnie was talking about that no gain, no pain, no gain. This was a time when people were starting to look for how can we dance and still live our lives? How can we dance and be sane? So she was taking this yummy, delicious stuff and putting it through this sieve, and out came beauty, clarity, just something completely new, completely new. So when I think about what I took from Tricia, it was almost just the experience of being in the presence of somebody that was the most soft-spoken, yet rigorous, sweet genius. Definitely her work was just opened up a whole new field of movement. And she built a whole vocabulary from scratch. And the other thing I took from being in the company was just the fact that I got to be in a professional dance company. I mean, I got to dance with somebody and get paid for it. I actually got a paycheck. And I can say, yeah, I did that, you know. When I had started with very little technique, started late in my life, I got to travel in Europe. But, you know, the interesting thing is that I also got the gift, in a sense, of learning that living in New York art scene was not the life that I really wanted to live. I just knew that. It wasn't the most important. Instead, what I felt like when I left Tricia after 5 years, that I had this inheritance from all these people that brought me the gift of being able to live right here in the present moment without any drama, without any big, you know, walking out. I could just walk right where I was and still be a dancer. So that's what I'm doing today, and isn't it great that, I mean, being a dancer is the biggest gift in the world. I can't imagine if it hadn't happened to me. Thank you.
I can't imagine a more wonderful way to tell you about why Minneapolis is such a remarkable place for the dance world here, right? So there's lights on. If any of you have questions for any of our artists, or if other things have come up, we have just a teeny bit of time. before we all go upstairs. I hope you'll all join us.
Don't we have any plants?
Do we have anybody to ask a question? Upstairs. Well, you're all invited to talk to our dancers upstairs, and we hope you'll come back for the Choreographers Evening on Saturday, which is 30 years old, and we're all excited to be having you. And it's a question. Oh, good. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you all have memories of other earth-moving performances that came to Minneapolis that really affected you or changed you in any way.
What other earth-moving memories do you have of performances that have come to Minneapolis? I have to answer first. It's my prerogative, right? I remember seeing Eric Bruhn doing Miss Julie on stage at Northrop when I was a little girl. And the Andahazis had told us that we should definitely go to see the ballet. And they were a very big influence here. And I didn't get a chance to speak to them, or for them, or about them. But the fact that I, as a little girl, got to see Eric Bruhn do Miss Julie was the sexiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yes. Who else has a memory?
Mark Pliskaya, who's Swan Lake.
She came with the Bolshoi, Dying Swan. Mm.
Oh, I know. Steve Paxton and Lisa Nelson on this stage here. Who was the music?
Robert Ashley.
Robert Ashley. I heard they just did it again somewhere. So they're still doing it.
My mother. As a young child, seeing her do a solo that was very, very dramatic and very intense.
Does the audience have any memories of splendid dances they've seen?
I would say for me, it's probably the first time I saw Ailey at Northrop and doing Revelation.
Merce Cunningham and John Cage on this stage.
Aha. It's true. Well, you're all grand to have come and listened as patiently and with as much excitement. And please join us upstairs in Gallery 8, which is the restaurant, and don't disappear. Thank you so much for coming.